So, what if just one stone, pulled from the ground in a Minnesota field, could literally rewrite everything we think we know about the founding of America? Okay, we're going to dive into this, because we are about to explore an artifact so controversial it could either be one of the most clever hoaxes ever, or it's the key to a history that's been hidden for centuries.
I mean, that is not a small claim, right? That's a statement from forensic geologist Scott Wolter, who is really at the center of this whole story. And it's that bold claim that turns a simple rock into a high-stakes investigation that could, change our history books forever.
So where does this all begin? Well, it starts with a single object, an artifact that really shouldn't even exist, the Kensington Runestone.
Okay, so picture this. It's 1898. A Swedish immigrant farmer, Olof Oman, is out clearing his land. He's pulling up an aspen tree, and tangled up in the roots is this big 202-pound slab of stone, and carved all over its face and side is this detailed message in old Scandinavian runes telling a story of a journey that went terribly wrong. And it ends with a very, very specific date, 1362.
And this, right here, is the heart of the whole controversy. The date on that stone, 1362, puts Norse explorers deep in the heart of North America more than 130 years before Columbus even set sail. If this thing is real, it just completely upends the entire timeline of when Europeans got here.
But back then, the academic world didn't see a historical bombshell. They saw a fake. The runes were called incorrect, the story was just impossible. The so-called experts of the day called it a hoax. And that immediate dismissal, well, it cast a shadow over the stone for the next 100 years.
But what happens when you set aside all that historical opinion and you just apply modern science to the stone itself? Well, that's where the story takes a really interesting turn and becomes a full-blown forensic investigation.
Now, this is Scott Wolter's world. See, he's not a historian, he's a material scientist. He basically performs autopsies on rock and concrete, and he approaches every single case, including the runestone, as if he's going to have to present his findings in a court of law. To him, the rock itself is the star witness.
So, what did the rock have to say? This is the crucial part. Wolter compared the weathering inside the carved runes to local tombstones from the 1800s, and under a super powerful microscope, the minerals in the runestone's carvings were way more decayed. His conclusion was pretty blunt. The carving was absolutely, without a doubt, older than 200 years. As he puts it, the rock says it's real.
Okay, so the geology checks out. But what about those incorrect runes? If the rock is old, the language has to be right too. So Wolter followed this trail all the way to a Swedish island called Gotland. And there, in the floors of these old medieval churches, he found grave slabs with the exact same runes, the same dialect, even the same quirky dating practices that are on the runestone. And get this, none of this had been studied or published when the stone was first called a hoax. The errors were actually authentic.
All right, so if the stone is authentic, the questions just get bigger. Who in the world were these 14th century explorers in the middle of Minnesota? And why were they there? Well, the evidence trail from Gotland was about to point to a very, very unexpected group.
Remember those churches on Gotland? The ones with the linguistic proof? Well, it turns out they were built by the Cistercians. And the Cistercians were, for all practical purposes, the parent organization of the Knights Templar. The warrior monks were basically Cistercians who carried swords. All of a sudden, the evidence isn't just pointing to any Norseman, but maybe, specifically, to the Templars.
And the connection gets even stronger when we look at the inscription itself. There's this one single, strange symbol that shows up over and over again, one that completely baffled the early scholars and was a huge reason they dismissed the stone as a fake.
This is it, the hooked X. It's used for the letter A on the stone. Now, the experts back in 1898 had never seen anything like it, so they just figured it must have been made up by the forger. But what if it wasn't a mistake? What if it was a signature?
So according to Wolter's theory, this symbol is just packed with secret meaning. It's like an ideological flag. The axe represents the joining of male and female principles. The little hook symbolizes their child. This creates a holy trinity of father, mother, and child, which was a direct challenge to Catholic doctrine and a core belief of the Gnostic faith that the Templar leadership secretly followed.
And this is where the story completely explodes. From a quiet field in Minnesota to a global stage. This one symbol, the hooked X, it becomes a breadcrumb in a trail of clues that spans centuries and continents.
The stakes for this symbol went global years into Wolter's research.
He was sent an image from the team investigating the Tulpiot tomb in Jerusalem, and carved on the lid of a bone box that some believe belonged to Jesus of Nazareth was a monogram that contained his hooked X. The very symbol that branded the runestone a hoax suddenly appeared in one of the most sacred and controversial sites on Earth. But the trail doesn't stop in Jerusalem. It leads right back to America, to this structure in Newport, Rhode Island. The official story is that it's just an old colonial windmill, but Wolter argues the evidence points to something much, much older and way more significant: a Templar church.
I mean, the details just don't add up for a windmill. It sits on 8 round columns, which is a classic Templar design. It has a fireplace, and putting a fireplace in a grain-filled windmill is a recipe for a massive explosion. Its windows aren't random, they line up perfectly with astronomical events. And radar scans show the ghostly footprint of a first story, exactly like a Templar round church would have had.
So what does this all mean? We have a runestone in Minnesota, a tower in Rhode Island, a symbol connecting them all the way to Jerusalem. If this theory is true, it's not just about who discovered America first, it's about why they came here.
You can almost see the dominoes start to fall. Once you accept the stone is genuine, you have to accept the Templars were here. That completely rewrites the timeline of discovery. And if they were here, you gotta ask, what was their mission? And the answer, according to the research, changes everything.
The inscription itself talks about acquisition, about taking up land. Wolter argues this wasn't just a grave marker, it was a legal document. It was a land claim for a new, free society, a sanctuary from the persecution they faced in Europe, the very foundation for the nation that would one day become the United States of America.
And that leaves us with this one final, kind of mind-blowing thought. We're all taught that America's story began with parchment and ink in 1776. But what if the first chapter was actually written 400 years earlier, not with a quill, but with a chisel? What if the nation's true founding document has been hiding in plain sight this whole time, carved in stone?